Before we get started, I have a quick favor. I've been self-funding the Finding Genius podcast for 5 years now. I've done over 3,000 episodes. And as you can see on YouTube, we're up over 1 million views on the channel, which is fantastic. The next thing I really want to push on is to get up to 10,000 subscribers. Because once we do, we'll be able to put a donate button and we'll be able to solicit donations to help keep the podcast running and to also get the Finding Genius Foundation moving along. We have a big project studying anxiety, depression, and PTSD and working on a product to help people overcome these problems because I've seen them explode recently after the last 2 years of the whole virus situation. So if you would, please subscribe to the podcast. That would help us tremendously. Give us a thumbs up and check in the description for Buy Me a Coffee. It's about $5. If you could buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. It would help keep the channel going, and I love coffee. Thank you.
Forget frequently asked questions.
Common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
Go above and beyond.
they become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%.
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
With Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius podcast, now part of the Finding Genius Foundation. My guest today is Henger. She's a postdoctoral fellow in the molecular lab at the Wildlife Conservation Society. And we're going to talk about urban coyotes. Unfortunately, when I think of coyotes, I think of, people that bring other people across the border or all kinds of other weird things. I guess the cartoon of, Wile E. Coyote and all that. But living in Texas, I've heard some coyotes at night in my neighborhood, and I am curious about them. So I'm glad to talk to them about them with Carol. So welcome.
Yes, thank you. Glad to be here. I do want to mention I did move on from the molecular lab at the Bronx Zoo. I'm actually an educator. I teach students about DNA now. I fell in love with genetics during my graduate studies and the postdoc, and now I teach that to students, to middle and high schoolers.
Oh, very nice. Yeah.
I'm also a Texan. I'm from Dallas. So I also grew up, knowing about coyotes and hearing about them. And I was very interested in studying them once I got to New York. Just like everyone else, I didn't realize there were coyotes here.
Really? I didn't know that. Where are they in New York? I'm from Long Island, like Queens, but where are they at? Like way out on the island or what?
They're making their way to Long Island right now. New York City was kind of their last place to expand their range. So they weren't always from the East. They are actually from the Midwest and the western parts of the United States. We had wolves here in the East that kind of, kept coyotes away. Extirpated the wolves. There was this whole new niche that was open for the coyotes to make their way across the United States. And that happened over time. Generations after generations just kind of made their way over to the East over about 100 or 200 years. And New York City was kind of, they're one of the last places to colonize. And now Long Island is the last place in the continental U.S. that coyotes are not established yet, but you do have coyotes there on Long Island. And there's the people I collaborated with, the Gotham Coyote Project. They're actually studying the Long Island coyotes to see where they are, how many there are, and what are they eating there as well.
Oh, and maybe it sounds weird or ignorant, but what's the difference between a coyote and a wolf?
Coyotes are smaller and they're omnivores, whereas wolves are strictly carnivores. But coyotes, their diet is more like your dog. They can eat anything pretty much. They're less of that pack that you think of with a wolf pack. Coyotes, they tend to live in family groups, but it's less of that pack mentality. They don't really hunt as a pack usually. They are it's like a more fluid dynamic where they will hunt for food on their own and then come back to the family group later on. So that's kind of the similarities. Another thing about the eastern coyotes is that they do have some wolf DNA because there were some hybridizations. As coyotes were making their way over to the east, they did encounter some wolves in Canada and there were some hybridizations. And so today's eastern coyotes actually have some wolf DNA and actually some dog DNA because coyotes, wolves, and dogs can all interbreed. I've heard it be called Canis supus because they can all interbreed. They don't usually because they're very behaviorally different. But if you only have, a few animals in a certain location, that it does happen. There is, you might hear occasionally the term coy wolf. And that's kind of, I've heard that being described, the eastern coyotes being described as coy wolves. But that's kind of a misnomer because there's not really 50%, each coyotes and wolves. It's not like a new hybridization. It's just that coyotes carry that wolf DNA from hybrids that happened generations ago.
What about their personality? personalities and their hunting and methods, how do they differ from wolves versus like a pack of wild dogs or hyenas?
Mainly it's just because they hunt on their own. You don't often see coyotes hunting together. They are usually by themselves when they get food. And it's more of the smaller animals for coyotes as opposed to wolves who could take down, a whole deer. Coyotes stick with, animals like rabbits or raccoons or mice. So smaller type of animals that they can take, they can get themselves. They don't need a pack to help them take down a bigger animal. So that's the main difference between coyotes and wolves. Just more like they're more individualistic, and behaviorally wise, coyotes are more individualistic. They have, a lot of studies have shown that, you can't really say one single thing about coyotes. Like each coyote is kind of its own individual, and they make their own choices. So it's hard to say, to really pinpoint coyotes do this, coyotes do that, because they're such of this like plastic behavior. They're so adaptable, and they're just so smart at adapting to their situations that each coyote is it's different. It has its own personality almost, and it makes different choices. Whereas wolves.
Does anyone have them as pets or anything, or can they be domesticated? Do you want them to be? Maybe. Yeah, flea-bitten troublemakers or something.
Yeah, I think that's more the case. I think it's happened. I think people have had them as pets, but they're not good as pets. They will display coyote behaviors, and they really can't be domesticated as far as I know.
Interesting. So where do they tend to go? I mean, how close do they live to human development? Are they very close? They just come out at night or on garbage night to eat stuff? Like what happens?
They live close to us, but they have to be able to hide. It's like in New York City, we have big parks. We don't often think of how much park space and green space we have here, but we have Pelham Bay Park and Van Cortlandt Park are two really big parks with a lot of green spaces, but that's in the middle of human development. So they can live by us, but you don't see them. They're hiding within the parks. They like to stay away from humans. They still have that fear of humans, and, they kind of hide in the trees, and just, they'll only be active at dawn and at dusk, that's the main time that they're active. Yeah, they're scared of us, and it's good for us to keep them scared of us. We don't want to, encourage behaviors where they actually come out to meet us. Like, we don't want to feed them. We don't want to encourage any behaviors like that, because then you can get into trouble with, coyotes starting to bite you, because they're used to food. But they have a natural fear of humans. And so even though they can live near us, they stay away. I've only seen a coyote once in New York City, and that's because I knew where to go, and I had to leave at 4 a.m. to go and look at it. But otherwise, you really don't see them that much.
Well, how do you observe them for study? I mean, do people take them in and raise them, or what happens?
Really, the ways to study coyotes are using camera traps, where you put up a camera around a tree, and it's a motion sensor, and you get pictures that way. The way I studied them was I looked at their fecal samples. So I didn't have to actually go and look at any coyotes. I just studied their genetics from looking at their poop, basically. It's very hard to actually study the behavior of coyotes because it's very hard to get near them. So you can kind of study them from a distance.
I mean, I guess no one's able to study them up close. What about, are there any zoos or game parks that have them where they could be observed?
Oh, that's true. Yeah, actually, yeah, in zoos or game parks, you could do that. If it's a captive population, you could definitely study their behavior that way. And there's also scientists that...
What about tagging them? Like,
yes,
knocking them out and tagging them and stuff,
Exactly. Yeah. There's actually a long-running project in Chicago, and the PI, Stan Gert, has been studying them for generations, and he does a lot of the tagging, the putting GPS collars, and actually has video of them. He'll put GoPros on the coyotes to kind of see where they go. So that's a great way to study them as well. Yeah.
Instead, they should be called GoCos, GoKay instead of GoPros.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, that's cool. Any interesting observations that he's had of watching them for so long?
Oh, gosh, that's a good question. I'd have to look into his research to see it. A lot of actually his research I put into my PhD studies. He kind of combined a lot of the research that had been obtained about urban coyotes. And there's a few things we know. Like I told you before, it's hard to really pin down, what do we know about urban coyotes, because they're all so different. But there are a few things that he was able to figure out. So coyotes in urban areas, they tend to be more active at night, like what I was saying, to avoid humans, and they tend to, stay away from the developed areas. So they try to stay away from sidewalks or, any areas where humans would be. And if they are in those areas, they tend to move faster to get to those more naturalistic areas. I did actually collaborate with the Gotham Coyote Project here. That's just a collaboration of different scientists that are studying coyotes. And they did manage to put some GPS collars on a few of the coyotes here and monitor them for about a year. And they did find that those those coyotes stayed within the naturalistic areas too, and they didn't go into the urbanized, like residential zones, which was good. It's good to hear, because I think that's when the coyotes could get themselves into trouble if they're running into humans and people see them at all times of the day. So it's good that they were kind of staying away and just using those natural areas.
Well, what are you hoping to learn about them that's not already known?
Well, I was happy to be a part of the diet study. I got to use the genetics to see what they were eating. And I actually wanted to see what human food they were eating. I was really curious about. So I was able to find out that they're mostly eating naturalistic foods here in the city. So that was great to find out. Like rabbits, raccoons, deer, which they're probably scavenging from the parks. But I also thought it was really interesting the human food they're eating. They're eating chicken is the most common human food that I found. And that is all over the parks. I do see chicken bones everywhere. So it makes sense that
The chicken lovers.
yeah, because we eat so much chicken as just humans. It's all over the human diet. So it makes sense that they're opportunistically picking that up. And then I found things like rice, and I found like, what else? Some meat items that I just figured were from human, like I think ham, and they're not going to find a pig in the city. Things like olive and chickpea. So I thought, oh, maybe it was visiting a halal cart. So it was interesting to find that out. And it does make sense because they are opportunistic. So they're just opportunistically just finding those diet items that we're leaving out.
Before we continue, I've been personally funding the Finding Genius podcast for 4.5 years now, which has led to 2,700 plus interviews of clinicians, researchers, scientists, CEOs, and other amazing people who are working to advance science and improve our lives and our world. Even though this podcast gets 100,000 plus downloads a month, we need your help to reach hundreds of thousands more worldwide. Please visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click on Support Us. We have 3 levels of membership from $10 to $49 a month, including perks such as the ability to see ahead in our interview calendar and ask questions of upcoming guests, transcripts of podcasts you're interested in, the ability to request specific topics or guests, and more. Visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click Support Us today. Now back to the show.
Do they eat rats?
No.
When they're around, is it like when they're around, like is there any benefit or would that?
Well, I was hoping to find that they ate rats because that would be a great service, but I only found rats in a few of their scats. So they don't seem to be a big consumer of rats. Unfortunately, I think they will eat them, but it's not really a preferred diet.
What about pigeons?
Pigeons.
Like delicious New York pigeons. Yeah.
They tended to like pigeons. So I did find the birds in the diet, and pigeons were the most widely eaten bird. So they definitely check out the pigeons. I'm sure that any slow pigeons or any pigeons they can just scavenge, they're already dead. So yes, they do they do eat pigeons. I also looked at domestic cats because a lot of the studies from other urban areas like Los Angeles, they study the coyotes there. They found that cats are a big part of the diet. But here, I only found a few cats. So they're not eating the feral cats in New York City, for better or for worse, good or bad.
Yeah, but how do they reliably get ham, turkey, chicken, all that stuff? I mean, like, what's the major thing you found? Is it really chicken? Like, will they go days until they could find chicken somewhere? Or like, where are they getting all this food?
I really think it's just opportunistically. They're in the parks, and I think they're just, if they see it, they'll eat it. But they can reliably get wild animals. They can get raccoons. They can get rabbits, squirrels. So there's plenty of things that they can eat, like moles, things like that. And yeah, there's just a ton of naturalistic food items, so that they don't need our human food. That's what I wanted to see. Are they relying on our human food? But it doesn't seem like they are. They're just opportunistically getting it. And if we secured our trash better, they would just stick to the animals that they're already eating.
What happens in where in the country have coyotes been for a long time? And there's a whole lot of them, and, we're able to see the effects they have on their environment. Like, what's their place in the environment that you've seen?
It seems to be there's a lot of talk, are they like an apex predator? And it does seem like they are the top predator in the United States because we don't have wolves. So they do seem to be the predator here. They didn't totally take over the wolf niche because they can't take down the bigger animals. Like a coyote can't take down deer, live deer. So they haven't replaced wolves in that regard, but they too tend to be the top predator at least in urban areas, because in more rural areas, you have things like mountain lions. They can take down bigger animals. But in urban areas, coyotes are the top dog, the top predator here.
Interesting. So again, I don't know, do they seem to have any beneficial role, or they're just there and they're eating stuff? And and hanging out, but they don't really disturb the ecosystems they're in or change them very much.
Yeah, I don't think they really disturb them. I think they just kind of fit right in. Like here in New York City, they actually ate a lot of raccoons. So they may be, able to kind of regulate the raccoon population. And that's actually pretty good since raccoons can carry things like rabies and other diseases. So that might be a good way that they can kind of regulate the ecosystem that way. Take out any, to kind of regulate those animals that didn't really have anyone before. Raccoons are pretty big. There really was no other animal that could consume them, So I think that's what they can do in urban areas like New York City.
Yeah, I remember years ago we went to San Diego and went to this hotel that, all the rooms like exited into the central courtyard with lots of plants. And we saw like a big raccoon sitting on the garbage eating a pizza. And I remember we were like, yeah, it's funny. All these animals, they seem to be just opportunistic. Like in Arizona once I was visiting a friend and I came home late at night and there was all these javelinas, these wild pigs that were in the street. It was garbage night and they came down from the mountain and they knocked over the garbage cans and like the mother would knock over the garbage cans, the babies would rush in and eat it.
Oh, wow.
So I've seen all kinds of weird stuff. Like we had a porcupine in our yard the other night. It was weird. It just, I don't know what it was doing. And then it climbed the fence and just walked off into the night. And there's all kinds of crazy stuff that happens. We've seen possums and raccoons and everything.
That's amazing. I can't believe javelina. It's a big animal.
Yeah, they're the size of like a 30, 40-pound dog.
Okay.
Maybe a little bit bigger. Yeah, they smell very musky. And it was just funny that they were going through the garbage, the mother, the babies and everything.
Oh,
it's weird.
Yeah, we really do affect the behavior of a lot of different species by leaving out our trash.
Yeah, it's weird. So what are you hoping to figure out about coyotes? Like zero in more on their diet, or like what are you trying to learn about them?
I would love to learn more about how they're, moving around the cities. It is so hard to get, GPS collars on them. I'd love to see more research on, how are they moving through New York City? Because we know that in the city, we have coyotes in most of the parks here, and they're in Bronx. They move through Manhattan and we know they're in Queens, but we have no idea, like, how do they get from, the Bronx or Manhattan over to Queens?
We go to the BQE, take the bridge,
think maybe, they can swim. So that's a possibility. There is footage, if you Google it, of a coyote being rescued from the water because it was swimming. So you just don't know how they got there. And I would love to know how they're moving through, let's say the Bronx into Manhattan, things like that, so that would be interesting. I'd also love to see a diet study, because we all use different methods in our diet study. So I used genetics. Other people, they use microscopes and they visualize leftover remnants. And I'm sure we get different results depending on the method we use. I think it'd be really interesting to do a really big diet study of a couple of different cities using the same method and really comparing the diets of coyotes in the different cities like New York City and Chicago and LA, and just, to see if those differences are because we're using different methods or are they actually eating such different foods. I think that would be really interesting to study.
But their calls, their howl, as opposed to wolves.
Yeah, they do. They have the yip call. I'm sure you probably heard of it when you're in Texas, right?
Yeah, they go, "What?"
Yeah, the yip. I think there's a study that they concluded that it's so powerful when you hear that. It's so loud.
Kind of scary too. It like chills you, like, oh shit.
You're like, how many coyotes are there? I've heard that they do that to kind of see like how many are in the area. Like it's like a call and response, see how many coyotes in addition to that one family group, are there others in the area? So that's what I've heard is the point of all the yipping, to get a consensus or a census of what's in the area. But yeah, kind of freaky to hear that.
So you really haven't had much ability to like hang out with one or observe one or pet them or...
No, I couldn't tell you much about coyote behavior because I only have seen their pictures on camera traps and I've seen their genetics. So what I know is just from what I've read in the literature.
Well, what have you seen in their genetics, like compared it to wolf DNA, dog DNA, other creatures?
I don't know too much about like the genes they have that are different. It's mainly, I do know about like what I told you before about the eastern coyote having the mixture. It's about 80% coyote DNA. And then they have about 10% wolf DNA and 10% dog DNA. But no, I don't know that much about the genes that distinguish coyotes, wolves, and dogs. But I do know, talking about genetics of the three, I know that my collaborators, they studied the New York City coyote population, and they realized that there is some dog DNA, some recent dog DNA that's in our coyote population. So they are interbreeding with some dogs. So that's kind of interesting. And I think there's more research to be had in terms of genes. Like, are those hybrids, are they going to get some dog genes that maybe make them more used to humans, something like that. But it's all interesting.
Well, if they're able to successfully interbreed with dogs, I would think, yeah.
Yeah. What are those genes that are going to come through? Are they going to be, what kind of dog genes? It would be interesting. I'm sure it'll be studied, and I can't wait to hear what the results are.
Okay. Well, very good. Where can people find out more about, your work with coyotes and learn more about them?
I have a website. I need to update it, but I have a website. It is carolhenger.com. So carolhenger.com.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, Carol, thanks for coming on the podcast, and I hope that you're able to, learn quite a bit more about them and observe them soon.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It was great talking to you.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.